great. All right, we're up and running. So, good afternoon. I'm Eric Brown. I'm the Assistant Public Works Director for the town of Gilbert that oversees the utilities that we're going to be discussing today. For those folks in the room, just so you're aware, we're doing a live stream so that folks can watch this on the internet. So it will be helpful for us to hold all the questions till the end because they won't be able to hear your questions. When we finish the live stream, then we'll be able to have a little bit more of just a regular conversation about any questions that you might have. For those folks who are online, there is an email address that you can send any questions to. It is utility.rates@gilbertaz.gov. And somebody will get back to you typically within a week on any questions or comments you might have. So I'm going to share with you the utility rates that we're going to present to council. But before I do that, I want to just give a little bit of background about the needs for the utility rates. We've got several critical projects that will be funded by the additional revenue produced by these rate increases. The Sanoke Wash is one of them. That's a regional stormwater conveyance system that moves water from the east and through the town of Gilbert into the eastern Maricopa floodway. We'll go a little bit into more depth about that project in a little while. And then the riparian preserve, you all are probably very familiar with the riparian preserve. It's a water resource amenity, and it helps us with our sustainability within Gilbert and the reuse of all of our reclaimed water in Gilbert. We've got a project to improve our ability to maximize our water resources at that site. I'll get into a little bit more detail on that as well. These are critical projects that have to happen very soon. And that's what's driving the need for additional utility rates. There will be consequences for our public safety, our ability to sustainably operate our water systems, and consequences for the environment if we don't do these in a timely manner. So the following presentation will help you understand what all of those potential consequences could be, as well as how we intend to meet those needs. As I mentioned, these utility rates will be presented at the public hearing on February 21st at the open council meeting at 6:30 that night. And again, there's that utility.rates@gilbertaz.gov email where you can send any questions that you might have. So as we discuss increased utility rates, I want to also give a little bit of background in comparison to where we stand across our regional partners across the valley. Your utility bill has up to 4 different utility rate components on it. Some may have as little as 2, some may have all 4. We can benchmark 3 of those utilities to all of our regional neighbors. That's the water rate, the wastewater or sewer rate, and then the trash rate. When we do an average rate comparison for an average residential water use and sewer use, as well as trash service, we can compare those costs for that residential customer. And you can see Gilbert, for that level of service, is the second lowest in the valley under our existing rates, at about $78 a month for an average water use. So keep that in mind as we are talking about the size of the rate increase and the impact on the monthly scale for our residential customers. Towards the end of the presentation, I'll come back to this slide with our recommended rate increases. But just so you can see, we don't strive to be the lowest rate in the valley, although that is an important data point for us. We strive to have the highest quality service and the best value. So you may be paying less if you live in Chandler. You may not be receiving the same value because the quality of your services may not be comparable to Gilbert. One important aspect is that we have all of the financial data available for you to look at on our website, gilbertaz.gov/utility rates. You can see in that red oval there that's highlighted on the screen that we have got the rate study is posted there for you to view. That includes all of our utility financial information, our 5-year financial plan, the existing revenues, and then the projected revenues under the new utility rates. So you can see all of that financial information in there. That website has a lot of other important information for customers, including the timeline, and for our non-residential customers, we've got a utility bill impact calculator for you. One question that has already come up in our conversations with our residents and our council is, didn't we just do a rate increase this last year? If you've been here for more than 12 months, you know that we did do a rate increase in the spring of this last year. That was for 2 of those 4 utilities that are on your bill: the water and the environmental services, which is also known as trash and recycling service. Those 2 utilities are not recommended for change under this rate cycle. We're going to do the other 2 this year: wastewater and environmental compliance. That's important, and that was a guidance from our council, was to do these on an annual cycle, but do 2 utilities in 1 year and then the other 2 in the other year, and then repeat the process. The goal there is to spread out the impacts to our customer, rather than having all 4 in 1 year, having a very large impact, and then none in the following year. They wanted to try to ease the pain, so to speak. So that was their guidance for us. There's also a very important distinction that needs to be made right off the bat. We are talking about utility rates. Utilities in Gilbert are completely separate financial entities within the town umbrella. Okay, so we call those enterprise services. Utility rates are only used to pay for the cost to operate, maintain, and run that utility. We don't take utility rates from your bill and pay for police or fire or parks. We keep those funds completely separate from any revenues that we might get through taxes. Okay? And conversely, we do not use any taxes to subsidize your utility rates. That is a little bit different than some of our other communities around us, where they do take money out of their utility rates and pay for those general government types of services. We don't do that in Gilbert. Your wastewater system that you're paying for on a monthly basis, those monies go directly to fund the operation of that wastewater system. It goes to nothing else other than funding the operation of that system. The last kind of upfront question that I want to answer is one that we hear quite a bit, and that is, all of this growth is causing all of these increases, right? And the answer to that question unequivocally is no. Growth does not cause your utility rates to change. This slide is an attempt to describe how growth is required to pay for its impacts on the system. New development is charged an impact fee, also known as a system development fee, at the time that development occurs. We calculate and assess those fees that we charge to that new development for the cost to expand that utility system to meet the needs of that new development. So that can include things like an expansion of a wastewater treatment facility, or additional sewer lines or lift stations required to serve that new development. Okay, so this is building the infrastructure to serve that new development. They are charged the cost to build that infrastructure. We cannot use those fees, by law, we cannot use those fees to operate the system or to add on any parts of the system that are not related to the expansion for that development. Okay, so this is the idea that growth pays for growth. Growth is required to build the new infrastructure to meet its needs. So what this could look like would be, imagine a large intersection. At that hard corner, maybe a new gas station goes in. Okay, there is a system development fee that is calculated based on the projected demands for water, projected sewer demands, and other demands on the system that new development will incur. We charge that fee before they can develop. Then we build the infrastructure, or in some cases we have built it ahead of time and now they're paying back our investment into building that infrastructure. That's what that system development fee is for. That is completely separate from the utility rate, or also known as a user fee, that you pay every single month. Okay? Those user fees are now charged to that new development once it is up and running and operational, just like your home that you live in. We assess those monthly, and that is based on the level of service that you have subscribed to into our system. We develop a cost of service model and a rate study report. That's what is posted on the website to calculate those monthly fees. So the types of costs that we include into that model: the operation and maintenance of the system, just running the utility. That's probably the most common thing that you think of. The commodities used in running that system, like electricity or chemicals. And then repair and replacement of that system. So this isn't an addition to the system. This is, okay, we've built that infrastructure. The development paid for that building of that infrastructure. It doesn't last forever. We have to repair it. We have to replace it over time. So we have a separate utility account that we set aside monies for repairing and replacing that system. And then if we have a large infrastructure project, say an expansion of a treatment facility or a replacement of a treatment facility, it's a big cost. So we might have to bond, take out a loan, and pay that loan out back over 20 or 25 years. So that's called debt service, just like a mortgage, right? So that debt service is paid for out of the monthly utility rates. Again, we don't use those monthly utility revenues to expand the system to accommodate new users. And we don't support any general government services like police or fire or parks, or pick your least favorite government service. We don't pay for that out of our utility rates, okay? So now that we kind of understand the difference between growth and utility rates, let's drill down into that utility rate and understand where that revenue goes and how we use it on an annual basis. It essentially goes into three main buckets. If you consider that one big one is the rate, where the rate revenue comes in, we then use that for three kind of main purposes. The first is the operation and maintenance of the system. That's the things that you think of: running a wastewater utility plant, cleaning sewers, maintaining infrastructure to keep it in good working condition. All of those costs are steadily rising. Your electricity bill is probably rising. We use a ton of electricity to move water, your wastewater around, and to treat it as well. So those costs are rising on us as well. The second main area where our revenues go into are one-time expenses. These are things like new equipment, new operations and maintenance capital that isn't replaced due to growth. So something like an odor or corrosion control facility that was not an originally designed part of our utility. We're going to add those on, and we have to pay for that out of our utility rate revenue. Those are generally one-time projects, okay? So we're building something new to increase the level of service, so decrease odor complaints, decrease corrosion within our system. Those one-time projects are essentially the main lever that we use internally to, fortunately, audio just cut out there? No? Did it come back? Okay, all right. So what that means is usually that we're delaying a vital project beyond the industry standard or waiting until equipment is near failure before we replace it. So by delaying those projects, it has direct implications on the useful life of that infrastructure. And we'll talk about how we try to maintain it and keep it in good working condition in order to lower the overall cost of ownership for our customers. But by delaying something critical like an odor control project, we're actually doing the opposite. That infrastructure is not going to last as long. And so then we're going to have to replace it sooner at a higher cost. You can think about this in terms of how you maintain your vehicle. If you do an oil change every 3,000 or 5,000 miles, you're doing good maintenance on your vehicle and extending the life of it. Well, you can get away with not doing that oil change a couple times a year. Maybe you can go 2 or 3 years without doing an oil change, but then you're in for having to replace your entire engine because you've destroyed that engine from the inside out. That's what some of these capital projects are designed to help us to do, is like that monthly or semi-annual oil change on your vehicle. That's what we've typically done, is try to push off those projects as long as possible. The last area that those utility revenues go into is that repair and replacement fund. So this is a fixed transfer. So we set aside money on an annual basis to save up for some of those larger replacement projects that we might have. I'm going to get into a little bit more discussion on that in the following slides. So let's dive in a little bit more about what a repair and replacement fund is. It is meant to serve to fund infrastructure rehabilitation or replacement when those assets wear out, or in a forward-thinking utility, we're going to save up money so that when we do need to replace it, we have that money on hand in order to pay for that in cash. Our town council has developed a policy statement regarding the repair and replacement fund, and that states that it is to provide for a fiscally responsible infrastructure repair and replacement program that will enable Gilbert to maintain service delivery to our citizens. It supports the stewardship of public assets and the achievement of established standards and regulatory compliance. So what that all means is that we know that we're going to have to repair or replace pipelines that were put in the ground at one point. This graph actually shows this. This is actually a graph out of our long-range infrastructure plan. We know generally what the industry says is a life cycle of a pump or a pipeline or concrete structures or any of these other assets that we have in the ground that operate the utility. So we know how long those generally last, and then we also know how much it costs in order to replace that asset. And it's just a simple division problem at that point. If we have got a well that is planned to last 50 years and it costs $5 million to re-drill that well and re-equip it, we can divide the $5 million by 50 years, and we set aside that incremental amount every year in order to pay for that when it happens. And we do that with all of our assets. So we've got a giant spreadsheet that has all of our assets and the expected life cycle in them, and we can develop the life cycle costs here. And so you can see the gray part is the total cost to repair those over time, and the red part is the unfunded liability. So the amount that we do not have a revenue stream for. And you can see that starts to increase in the 2060s. And that's just under our existing repair and replacement policy. But what that means is that when we have a large project that we have to do to replace something, your utility rate doesn't jump up in that year because we have a $30 million expense that we have and we don't have the money. Conversely, in the next year, if we only have to spend $10 million, your rate doesn't go back down. So it doesn't jump up and down every year based on what projects we're doing. We're steadily transferring money, accumulating and spending out of that fund. Keeps your utility rates consistent, more consistent over time. Now, why is that important? Well, I'm going to just point directly to something that's happening right now in the world that you might be familiar with, the Jackson, Mississippi water crisis. If you're not familiar with it, that water system is failing. It actually has failed, and it has been failing for many years. And that has culminated with a boil water notice for customers. If those customers could even get water out of their tap, they had to boil that water in order for it to be safe for them to use. They've recently declared that the water is safe to drink again, but if we had been telling you for the last 4 months that you had to boil your water in order for it to be safe, and you had experienced this on and off for years and years and years, how much stock would you place in us telling you that your water is safe to drink? Probably not very much. The state of Mississippi stepped in to operate the utility, and now even the federal government has stepped in to operate that utility. So the less familiar part of that story that you is how they actually got there in the first place. It was due to many years of skipped reinvestment into the utility to keep it in good working condition in favor of keeping utility rates low. I'm actually going to read this quote directly because I think it's really impactful. This crisis is due to decades, and decades, possibly 30 years or more of deferred maintenance, a lack of capital improvements made to the system, a lack of human capital, and a lack of a workforce plan that accounted for the challenges that our water treatment facility suffers from. The long-term cost of trying to keep rates low and not reinvesting in the system is now coming due, and the community is suffering for it. You may have heard of Gilbert's City of the Future initiative. The entire point of that City of the Future initiative is meant to keep Gilbert from beginning down that short-term thinking path that Jackson did so many years ago that has culminated in this crisis. The idea is that we don't take short-term gains at the cost of our long-term future. That's the entire point of the City of Future initiative. So the establishment and continual funding of and use of operating and repair and replacement funds for our utilities is a key component for our long-term strategy. So there's a potential that in these annual budget and revenue discussions that we miss the point of what we're the utilities are tasked with doing, and that is to provide basic services for the community in perpetuity, not just today. And the best possible level of governments for doing this is at the local level. But if we don't perform, there's always the possibility that the community loses that local control, like they did in Jackson, Mississippi. So the question that really this brings to mind is, what does it take for us to keep providing these utility services at the high level that you have all come to expect? So I'm going to dive into what this looks like for environmental compliance and then wastewater, and show you the revenue needs and the rate impacts. Environmental compliance is probably not a very familiar utility for most people. Our environmental compliance group was formed as a separate utility in 2018. And their responsibilities are operation and maintenance of our stormwater infrastructure, keeping us in compliance with air quality standards, and the compliance and enforcement of those standards on new development and on existing development as well. A lot of times we say that these are the unfunded federal mandates that are funded through this utility rate component. So what does all that actually stack up? Well, let's look at what stormwater infrastructure is, because it's hiding in plain sight. You might not be very familiar with it, but you've probably seen some of these things out there in the community. We've got over 10,000 stormwater structures out there in the community that our team maintains. We've got 102 retention basins. A lot of these are parks that you enjoy. Those are our utility services as well. They are for retaining stormwater. We've got 5 large stormwater pump stations, 2 channels and 2 washes that convey regional stormwater through our community, keep us from flooding. And then we've got hundreds of thousands of linear feet of stormwater pipe, and then 53 underground storage tanks to retain water. Those are typically like under other infrastructure like parking lots, so that we can get maximum use out of the land area. But that's a lot of infrastructure, and it is aging. And just like all of us, as we age, maintenance on us gets a little bit more expensive. There is no place in Gilbert where you can go where we do not have stormwater infrastructure out there that our team has to operate and maintain. So it's an important part of commerce in our community, as well as health and safety. Back in 2014, in October, you all might remember that we had the remnants of a hurricane come through, and it dropped several inches of rain on the valley in just a couple of days, and there was flooding everywhere. At that time, we identified 50 locations that had major flooding problems, and that was because of impacted stormwater infrastructure, buried stormwater infrastructure, some infrastructure that was never completely constructed. And at that time, we knew that we had a problem. And in Gilbert, when we identify that we have a problem, we go and find a way to fix it. So we developed our stormwater, our environmental compliance team. And then by 2018, we had identified a funding plan in order to make sure that we could actively go out and maintain this infrastructure. But you can see there's no water getting through any of this stormwater infrastructure, which leads to flooding. So we developed some operations and maintenance plans, and we started going out and cleaning infrastructure that had little to no attention paid to it over the previous 30 years. And Gilbert, by the way, is not unique in that. It is an overlooked utility across the country. Not anymore in Gilbert, though. We've got a small but mighty team of 2 individuals who go out and inspect and clean our stormwater infrastructure and repair and replace it. And so you can see the effects of what they do. The life cycle of this infrastructure is not as well known as it is in the water and wastewater industries, but we're developing that data so that we can make sure that we get out there and are replacing this infrastructure before it fails. Because you can imagine that stormwater grate, yeah, it's not functioning very well as stormwater because it's clogged. It's also a hazard because a lot of our gutters also act as bike lanes. And that's a hazard for anyone throughout the community. When we developed this environmental compliance fund, we knew that we needed to build a robust program, but we also knew that we didn't know everything about it. So we looked at a lot of these issues that you might see here, and we wanted to develop a team in order to meet these head on. We have learned a lot over those years. One of the main things that we learned was it is a lot more difficult to do and a lot more complicated than we thought it was. But we're committed to making sure that we have stormwater that is functioning and preventing flooding when we do have storms. Just describe a couple of the projects that we have on tap here. One of them is the Sanoke Wash. We did an assessment of the Sanoke Wash in 2017, and it identified that we had some significant damage to the berms on the wash, and that has eroded away and sedimented in the bottom of the low flow channel and is causing a lot of standing water. So you can see in that top left-hand picture, a picture of that wash where that bank is completely eroded away. All of the erosion has gone down into the bottom of the bank, and then you can see the standing water underneath the bridge. Standing water isn't just ugly, it's also a health hazard because that's where we get all of our mosquitoes that breed and then midge fly complaints. So It's also a health and safety issue for our community. So we identified that we had to do this project. We identified it back in 2017. We don't have the money to do it. So what we are planning to do is, at our council's guidance, is to raise the rates to save up money and cash fund this project. Not tomorrow, not next year, but in 5 years. So we identified this 6 years ago, and we have a plan to deal with it in the next 5 years. It's not timely, but that is, we have to balance the urgency of a project with the impact to the community due to the rate increases. And so that's the balance that we tried to strike. Council directed us, we could have gone out and done a bond, taken out a loan, but it was council's guidance to cash fund that project because that is a more fiscally responsible method, according to our town council. We've got another similar project at the Hunt Highway channel down in the southern part of Gilbert. Similar problem where we get flooding due to erosion in that Hunt Highway channel. That project is going to be completed also in a later timeline. And I'll show you that timeline in the future. But street flooding isn't just an inconvenience, right? Like we've all probably seen this in some form or fashion at some point in time. It's also a public safety issue. Imagine if you were having a medical emergency and we were trying to get to you running an ambulance through that neighborhood. We certainly would be delayed if we could get there at all. So it's not just a common nuisance. It's not just the standing water that causes mosquitoes. It's also the immediate public safety emergency responsiveness that can be a problem. So now that we're all experts on stormwater and that utility, let's talk about what this actually looks like from a financial perspective. We develop our utility rates based on a 5-year plan. We have got, of course, we've got expenses throughout the year, and then we've got revenue coming in. And at the end of the fiscal year, we've got some money left over on purpose. That's called a fund balance. We have got a council policy for developing the math problem that tells us how much minimum fund balance we should have at the end of that fiscal year. That line is the black line that you see, the horizontal black line there. Council policy directs us to have that minimum fund balance. And that's for things like you have to have a one year of debt service. If that utility fund has any debt, you have to have 1 year's worth of debt payments on hand at all times. You've got to have at least 3 months of operating expenses on hand at all times. Just good financial policies that any business follows. These are actually governed by a national organization that develops these for government entities. So that's that minimum fund balance. And we always have a target to have a little bit more than the minimum fund balance on hand at the end of the fiscal year. The orange bars that go down show you what happened with our minimum fund balance under the existing rates. So that $4.28 per month that you pay for the environmental compliance fee, you can see that our minimum fund balance goes negative in calendar year 2024 and just continues to go down. The yellow bars show what happened under the proposed rates. And so you can see that we save up some money and we peak in 2027, and then it comes back down in 28 and 29. And the reason for that is that in fiscal year 28, we've got that Hunt Highway Channel Protection program or project that's currently projected to be $5.5 million. So that will come out of that minimum fund balance. And then in 2029, that Sunoki Wash Restoration Project comes in, and that's at $8.5 million. You can see that in 29, we go below zero. We normally wouldn't recommend a rate plan that goes in that direction, but that's also 6, 7 years away. And so we've got several years between now and then to look at the projected costs as we hone in and we really we identify the scope of that project and the actual cost of that project, as well as what happens with revenue growth over time. So we'll look at those outer years in the next 2-year cycle, and then the 2-year cycle after that. So we're starting down the path to save up that money for those projects, and by the time we get closer to those projects, we'll fine tune the needs and the expenses for that utility. Okay, so that's at the kind of the macro level. Now, what does that actually mean to you, the homeowner or the business that operates in Gilbert? You're charged a flat fee right now, $4.28 per month. Our recommendation is to increase that by $2.51 per month to $6.79. That will help us operate and maintain the stormwater infrastructure and be able to save up money and cash fund those 2 large capital projects. Okay, let's move on to the other utility that is recommended for a rate increase. That is our wastewater utility, also known as sewer on your utility bill. This is a much, much, much larger utility in comparison. We've got 78,000 residential services, 852 miles of gravity sewer. So when you flush the toilet, that water leaves your house via gravity, goes into our sewer system via gravity until it's no longer economical for us to build a sewer line 30, 40, 50 feet deep. And then we have to do what's called a lift station, which does that. It lifts the water, pumps the water back up, and then it goes by gravity, in most cases, to one of 2 water reclamation plants where we treat and purify that water. And then we send it out via different pipes from the wastewater pipes, different pipes than the drinking water pipes. Send it out to over 60 customers that use that water. Now it's called reclaimed water because it's purified and clean. We have 63 reclaimed customers. Those are large landscape users like our parks, your HOAs, golf courses. Those are our 3 main customer categories. They reuse that water. We sell that to them, and so they are a utility customer within the wastewater utility. Any water that is not sent to those customers for direct use goes to our recharge facilities, like the riparian preserve. We have over $500 million worth of assets in this wastewater utility. There's a lot of assets to repair and replace and operate. Similar, but not quite to the extent of the stormwater utility. These assets are spread almost in every corner of Gilbert. There are some pockets of Gilbert that are not wastewater customers. Their house has a septic system and a septic tank buried in their backyard. So we don't charge those customers for this service because they're not our customers. There's a lot of pressures on this fund as well. GWRP and NWRF, those are acronyms for Greenfield Water Reclamation Plant and Neely Water Reclamation Facility. Those are the 2 wastewater treatment facilities that Gilbert owns. We own Neely outright, it is ours, and the Greenfield plant is owned in conjunction with Queen Creek and Mesa. It resides in Gilbert, but it's operated by the city of Mesa. And the Neely plant is owned by Gilbert and operated by a third-party contractor. So we have a contract with both of those entities to operate those facilities. Those contracts are rising rapidly. We use a lot of chemicals within our operation and other commodities. And just like the cost for chlorine in your pool has probably quadrupled over the past year, our cost for chlorine has done the exact same thing. We just use much more than a 5-gallon bucket of it. And our energy costs have risen significantly as well. And then we're making significant reinvestments in the infrastructure and then the security and the operation and automation of that system. So that bottom graph, you can see our fund expenditures have increased significantly over the last several years. And of course, the scale on that is there's actually probably one more zero than there was on the environmental compliance rate, our utility. So those are some of the general pressures. Let's talk about some specific things that we are intending to do with rate revenues. I already mentioned the riparian preserve, but I want to go into a little bit more detail about this. The riparian preserve is where we send a large quantity of our reclaimed water that's not used by direct customers. And we do that through a distribution box structure in the center. It's where all of those on the screen, they're kind of pink. Other screens, they're purple. It's where all of those purple spaghetti lines emanate from, is where we distribute the reclaimed water from. That structure was identified in the 2012 Water Resources Master Plan as insufficient. We could not put enough water through that structure in order to make maximum use of our reclaimed water. So we identified a project in 2012 to expand that structure so that we could make full use of the riparian preserve as a resource, as well as the water resource that we have on hand. We identified that project in 2012. We've not been able to do that project because we don't have the money to do it. So we've got a design in hand, and that project was planned for construction in fiscal year 24 if we get additional revenue from these rates. A critical project like this is really important, especially when we're talking about maximizing an existing water resource that we already have when we're talking about losses of a water supply on the Colorado River and the diminishment of that water resource for our community. This is key to being a sustainable utility in Gilbert. We need to be able to recharge every drop of water that we have available at our hands. This project will help us be able to do that. Something maybe more familiar that you think of when you think about wastewater is odor. Anywhere you've gone in Gilbert this time of year, you've probably smelled the sewer system in some parts of town. We know that, and we recognize that that's not the level of service that we want to provide to our customers. So we've identified multiple odor and corrosion control projects in Gilbert. What this actually looks like is, at this location, this is Guadalupe Road, and this is Greenfield Road. So this is the riparian preserve. Just to the east of that, before you get to Higley, is a location where we are planning to construct an odor control facility. What this will be is a small chemical injection facility where we inject chemicals into the sewer, and the goal there is to prevent the formation of that gas that creates those foul odors. It's not purely an aesthetic project, though. Yes, it's an odor control project, but that gas is highly corrosive, and it eats away our sewer pipes from the inside out. So this sewer pipe comes from here and goes south to the Western Power Line Trail and runs through the heart of Gilbert and through the downtown Heritage District over to our Neely Water Reclamation Facility. That pipe is the largest diameter pipe that we have in our system in Gilbert, and 3 million gallons of raw sewage runs through that pipe every day to the Neely Water Reclamation Plant. It's critical that we reduce the corrosion on that pipe. Number one, so that we don't have a massive failure on that pipeline. But number two, so that we make sure that we can get the maximum use and life out of that pipe, because it's going to cost tens of millions of dollars to replace that pipeline. If we can get 10 additional years out of it, that's $10 million that we can push off, or tens of millions of dollars that we can push off into the future. So we identified this project back in 2020, and we planned to do that in 2024 if these rates are approved. These are just two very, very clear projects out of a handful of projects that we had identified would be supported by the additional revenue from our rates. So what does this look like at kind of the macro level? Same graph. The minimum fund balance is just a lot larger. It's more like $8 million in this utility because it takes a lot of money on just a monthly basis in order to operate this utility. You can see that our existing rate revenue will cause us to go in the negative in fiscal 2024 if we do nothing. But we're fairly balanced over a longer time period. You can see that we kind of bob around that minimum fund balance. We don't have any large projects within this fund that we're planning to cash fund in comparison to the overall fund balance. So this is a little bit more balanced picture. But this is based on what we knew a year and a half ago when we developed the budget, and then we started the rate study and developed the creation of these rates. And so just like the Environmental Compliance Fund, those things change over time. We're going to revisit these utility rates for wastewater on a 2-year cycle. And so as things change, we can be a little bit more adaptive and responsive to those changes. So what does this look like at the micro level for you, our customers? For our residential customers, you are charged a flat fee of $24.73 a month. We recommend raising that by $8.02 to $32.75. That will fund the operation and maintenance of this utility and allow us to continue to do some of these critical projects in order to maximize the life cycle of that infrastructure. Our non-residential customers have a different rate structure. It looks a little bit more like your water rate structure. So they have a base fee. We're recommending raising that base fee by $5.26 per month. Then they also have a flow charge. It's a per 1,000-gallon increment of water use on their interior water meter. We're recommending raising that by 52 cents per 1,000 gallons. We also have those reclaimed customers, those HOAs, parks, golf courses. Since they are a part of the wastewater fund, we are raising those water rates for those customers. They have a monthly base fee, and you can see that's $15 a month. We're recommending raising that by $4.74. And then we have 3 different water usage rates depending on which type of water they receive from Gilbert. So some of them receive water directly from us through our Purple Pipe system, and we typically will deliver that to a lake or other reservoir within their community. They get that water currently at about 40 cents per 1,000 gallons, and that rate will go up to 54 cents per 1,000 gallons. Some customers receive our reclaimed water after we have recharged it in the ground. It gets pumped out of the ground through a well. If they own that well, currently they get charged 80 cents per 1,000 gallons, and that would go up to $1.07. If we own and operate the well and we take on all those expenses, that rate is much higher. It's $1.34, and that would rise to $1.79 per 1,000 gallons. Now these are, as I've described, these are critical investments into the utility. But we did recognize that this would be an impact to our customers. And so we tried to give as much advance notice as possible when we knew that we were going through this process, particularly for those reclaimed customers, because it might not look like 14 cents per 1,000 gallons might not seem like a big deal, but some of those customers will use 1 million gallons of water per month. So that will add up significantly. So when we had this conversation with our council in the spring at their financial retreat, we published the slides and the meeting video from that meeting on our rates website. And then we mailed letters out to all of our reclaimed customers back in April and May, alerting them to the likelihood of this process. And what we knew at that time was a potential scope of the rate increases so that we could give them as much time in order to prepare their budgets. We did our best. I'm sure we've already heard from some that somehow they missed that notification. But we did our best to alert our customers ahead of time. So let's return to that residential bill graphic that we had earlier on, and let's see where these proposed rates stack up in comparison to our partners around the valley. You can see under the current rate that Gilbert is the second lowest in the valley for an apples to apples comparison. And under the proposed rates, we would become third lowest in the valley. We, of course, take into account that our water and wastewater service are probably very comparable services to those other cities, but the trash service that is also a part of this rate comparison in Gilbert is head and shoulders above and beyond what you receive from any of those other communities. So we still believe, as far as value and the long-term investment that we are making into the community, still means that we have one of the highest values in Gilbert. So if you are one of those non-residential customers who would like to calculate the impact to you, you can go to our utility rates website, and we've got a link down here for our bill calculator. You can plug in your previous sewer rate and actual sewer increments, and we will calculate the change in your utility bill. For our residential customers, we know what that impact is. It's 2 flat fees that are going to raise, in combination, $10.53 per month. I mentioned that Gilbert is starting down this path of looking at these utility rates on an annual basis. So it's worth looking back at what we were doing in the past and how that is different. During the middle of the 2000s, Gilbert was increasing utility rates on an annual basis, and almost every single utility annually was getting a rate increase. And we got away from that. 2009 was our last rate increase at that kind of all the utilities or most of the utilities at once. In 2012 and 2018, we actually reduced your trash rate because in Gilbert, if we don't need the money, we don't ask for it. So we actually reduced our utility rates for that utility. In 2018, we did increase the water and the wastewater rates, and we created that environmental compliance fund and developed that fee at that time. And then we went a long time again without doing utility rate increases. Last year, we did the water and environmental services trash rate increases, and we did not touch the wastewater or environmental compliance. This year, we're going to do wastewater and environmental compliance, and we're not going to touch water and environmental services. And you can, if you're into planning for the future, you could probably take 2022, 2023 and extend those down to 2024, 2025. That's the rate cycle that our council has directed us to look at these. It does not mean that there will always be an increase, but it does mean that we will come to council with that financial plan under the existing rates. And if things all line up and work out, we won't ask for a rate increase. That really is the best practice, is to review these at least every other year. That's what all of the rest of the communities around us do. And again, the reason for doing 2 utilities at once rather than all 4 is to try to, as we're in this period of large corrections, because it's been 4 or 5 years since we've done rate increases. We've had this incredible change in inflation causing our costs to rise. we're going to have to make large corrections, we're going to help smooth out that impact rather than doing all 4 utilities in 1 year. So what can we expect? Again, back in March, we visited with our council in an open meeting and discussed the need to do utility rates, and they said, yes, go do a rate study. We've been doing that, and we presented that to council at their council meeting on December 13th, where they set the public hearing for February 21st. That's when they will make the decision on these rates at that council meeting. And if they adopt them, these rates will be effective with your April utility bill. So this is my last slide on this. For any of our customers on the live stream or watching this video on YouTube later on, you can send us any questions at utility.rates@gilbertaz.gov. Again, the public hearing will be on February 21st at 6:30. So at this time, we can stop that live stream. And then for anyone in here, if you have questions, I would love to entertain them right now.